The Supreme Court is the highest court in the land, and its rulings have shaped the United States for over 2 centuries. Some recent decisions have put a spotlight on the High Court.
Just minutes ago, the U.S. Supreme Court issued an order to keep a widely used abortion pill on the market.
Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Brett Kavanaugh sided with the court's 3 liberal justices, ruling that Alabama violated the Voting Rights Act by illegally watering down black voting strength.
The U.S. Supreme Court rejected a challenge by Texas to the Biden administration's policy on deporting certain immigrants. The court ruling was 8-1, with the opinion being written by a Trump-appointed justice.
The high-profile decisions come as polling found public approval is at an all-time low. Only 25% of Americans have confidence in the Supreme Court, according to Gallup. That's a dive of more than 10% compared to the same time last year. And ethics scandals have rocked the court over the past few months, including a long list of conflicts of interest, from a lack of recusals to undeclared payments and gifts.
It makes clear that while the justices are fine with consulting with certain authorities on how to address ethical issues, they do not feel bound by those same authorities.
Precedent has played a crucial role on the bench since it first took shape in the late 18th century. The court was first assembled during President George Washington's time in office. The Judiciary Act of 1789 established an early version of the 3-tiered federal court system of district courts, circuit courts, and the Supreme Court. And the court's more than 230-year legacy largely remains in its original form despite a few amendments. 6 men made up the nation's first Supreme Court, 5 associate justices, and the first Chief Justice, John Jay, who was President Washington's pick for the job. The president nominates justices, but Congress decides how many sit on the bench. That number changed a total of 6 times before lawmakers settled on the current 9-justice makeup in 1869. According to a recent NPR-PBS Marist poll, 62% of Americans said they have no or not very much confidence in the Supreme Court. That's the lowest recorded in the 5 years since Marist began polling. The lack of confidence is also stark among Democrats and independents. Some polling also indicates Americans are mixed or growing more favorable to expanding the court. The Senate is responsible for confirming the president's Supreme Court nominees. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, President Joe Biden's nominee, became the first black female on the bench in 2022.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me.
When sworn in, justices take the bench for life. The Constitution says to ensure an independent judiciary and protect judges from partisan pressures, the Constitution provides that judges serve during good behavior, which generally means until justices retire or die. However, the Constitution does not specify qualifications for justices. The Supreme Court says they can be any age, have any education or profession. A justice doesn't even have to be a lawyer or a law school graduate, but historically, all have been trained in the law. Unlike other court officials, the U.S. Supreme Court is the only judicial body in the country that does not have to follow an ethics code. But they aren't really allowed to act unethically either. If they do, that could result in impeachment. There is a statute that requires justices to recuse themselves from a case if there's a conflict of interest. Article 3 of the U.S. Constitution gave the U.S. Supreme Court jurisdiction over all U.S. laws, especially cases that involve a law's constitutionality. It has the power to decide appeals on all cases brought in federal court or in a state court if they deal with a federal law. Of the 7,000 to 8,000 petitions they get each year, they choose about 80 to 100 cases to review. The court's term begins in October, and the justices hear oral arguments for the next 7 months. In those hearings, lawyers for each side lay out their legal case. The court will typically discuss the cases with their law clerks to identify different views and form an idea of how they might vote. The justices then hold private conferences to decide the case. Supreme Court protocol says all justices have an opportunity to share their views without interruptions. They speak in order of seniority, starting with the Chief Justice, currently John Roberts. Once the votes are in, the most senior justice in the majority and minority decides who will write the court's opinions. But those opinions don't become final until the ruling is made available to the public. Justices have long held true to confidentiality and are not subject to the Federal Freedom of Information Act. Oral arguments have never been televised, and it wasn't until 2020 in the pandemic that the court began offering live audio from inside the courtroom. But despite any controversy around a case, the court pledges to uphold its ultimate responsibility, the one written above the main entrance in Washington, D.C., equal justice under the law. Stephanie Liebergen, Scripps News.